Hi, fans. Welcome to another pre-recorded Aftershock, pre-game Aftershock, and I'm excited to have with me second year in a row, Andy. Welcome back to the show. It's exciting to have you again, Andy Greder from the Pioneer Press. Andy, how's your off season?
It's good. Thanks for having me back on. I enjoyed the first time.
Yeah, we had a great conversation last year around all things around Minnesota United and the earthquakes, and we've got some emerging, storylines that to talk about this season.
Yeah.
So, Minnesota United off to a pretty good start to the season. I think there was, just a lot of various questions in terms of was this team going to be at the top of the West? Some people didn't think they would be in the playoffs. Right now, they're sitting in the seventh position, one win and a couple draws.
Yeah.
What would you say so far is standing out to you about this 2022 version of Minnesota United so far?
Yeah. I think when you look at the fact that they've got 5 points in 3 games, it's not going to wow you. But I think just on the simple next layer, just looking at the quality of competition that they've played Philadelphia in the season opener. Everybody knows how quality the Union side is under Jim Curtin. Nashville obviously had a great season a year ago. Have been good pretty much since they came into MLS. They're now in the Western Conference, as San Jose fans know, and they came back to get a draw in that one, and then they went on the road to New York Red Bulls, who through 2 weeks was sitting atop of the Eastern Conference table, and were able to go in there and due to Dave St. Clair standing on his head, we're able to come away with all 3 points in a 1-0 win. So I think 5 points through 3 games, like you said, kind of on the playoff line is not going to wow you. But if you look at who they've played and the results that they've gotten in those games, I think there is a satisfaction with that. I don't know if it's elation. I think it's more doing the business that needs to be done at this point in the season.
Yeah, and two of those teams are teams that the Earthquakes have already faced as
Right.
well. In their opener, the Red Bulls lost 3-1 at home, and Matias Almeida was trying some interesting stuff at the back line, but unfortunately, an injury to Nathan, a player
Mhm.
that was introduced to Minnesota United in a
Yeah.
kind of spectacular way last season, went down just a few minutes into the game with a knee injury and will be out for a couple months now. So Jackson Ewell has been
Mhm.
playing the right center back position, and then went into Philadelphia. Some inclement weather, but both teams obviously play in the same weather type situation, and the Earthquakes struggled to create opportunities in that particular game. So it's interesting that Minnesota United has gotten results against these teams that the Earthquakes, have struggled with so far.
Mhm.
I caught a bit of the Dane St. Clair performance. I mean, this
Yeah.
is a college goalkeeper who, it's a player that, of course, used Minnesota United scouted
Mhm.
and brought into the team. But man, I don't think we've yet seen a performance from Dane Sinclair quite like what we saw against the Red Bulls last week. It's one of those games where you lose on the expected goals and everything kind of looks bad from a stat perspective. But at the
Right.
end of the day, you go score line, and that's all that matters, right?
Yeah, for sure. Dane, this isn't his first taste. When Tyler Miller opted to have surgery on both of his hips during the COVID restart, Dane stepped in and led this team into a top four finish in the West in 2020, and they went all the way to the Western Conference Final that season. So Dane has been in the spotlight before, but then to start 2021. Minnesota United started off 0-4, and they needed to shake things up. They didn't pit it on Dane, but they made a switch in goalkeepers, and that kind of correlated to their change in form. And Tyler Miller started the last 30 games of the year, and I think had 11 clean sheets, and really took over that starting spot. And Dane, to start this year, was behind Tyler again, and only started that game at Red Bulls due to Tyler coming down with the flu. So it wouldn't have been in that spot unless Tyler had gotten sick. And obviously, Dane, makes eight saves, his career high. He stopped a penalty kick, which wasn't very well taken. He made some diving saves. He came off his line confidently a couple of times to deny some crosses and some set pieces, and really showed the aplomb that he showed as a second year player in 2020. And he's going to get the start on Saturday. Adrian, he said that earlier today, and it sounds like Dane is also going to get a call up the Canadian men's national team, even though he's only
Wow.
played one game so far this year. They like his upside. He started in a qualifier last summer against Aruba, so they like him in the mix, maybe as a goalkeeper of the future, just given what else they have at that position. But Dane is riding high going into the Earthquakes game Saturday.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting test for the Earthquakes, who've really struggled to kind of generate opportunities so far to face a hot goalkeeper, like that. Another place where there's been a bit of chatter has been on the outside back positions. It's an area that Adrian Heath hasn't really seemed happy about kind of the situation in the outside backs. I would say the Earthquakes find themselves in kind of a similar situation with Matias Almeida. I think he would like to see more talent on the outside. It's just a tough position in MLS to really get the right players that fit the system and our MLS, level quality into the spots. But this past week, a couple things happened. One, maybe you can speak a little bit to the Chase Gasper situation, but you also were able to bring in Kamar Lawrence, a player that, I think a lot of teams around MLS would be excited to have in their roster.
Right. Yeah.
A player who kind of fell out of favor up in Toronto and maybe some locker room issues there, but it struck a deal, and it looks like you might be on your way to getting Adrian Heath what he's looking for at the outside back position now.
Yeah, for a number of years, Chase Gasper and Roman Metnair, the right and left backs, were staples of this team, guys that played heavy minutes and did so for year after year after year. And to start this season, neither of those guys have played yet. Roman Metnair has been dealing with some muscle issues and hasn't played on the right side. And Chase Gasper had a concussion issue from preseason that cost him the first 2 games of the year. And it looked like he was cleared to play or have the possibility of playing at Red Bulls last week. And it looked like he was finally coming back from that. But then midweek here, he enters into the league's treatment program for substance abuse. And while I don't have any details on what he's dealing with, he's a very popular player within the team. He's a younger player, a bilingual speaker that has, friends in the English speaking community and the Spanish speaking community. And there's just a lot of support internally for what Chase is going through, but he made the decision to step away from soccer for a while to try to get himself right and get some treatment. And kind of independently, the timing was very, very eyebrow raising because it kind of happened at the same time. But they've been working to try to bring in Kamar Lawrence for a couple of years now. I heard about it, a couple of years ago that was a possibility or a desire when he was going over to Belgium to play for Anderlecht. And it didn't work out at that point. So then they, were able to bring him back in now after, like you said, he fell out of favor in Toronto, and they were able to bring him in on a bargain. They're only able to bring him in for rights to a second-round draft pick that the Loons didn't want, and $50,000 in kind of conditional metric, GAM if he plays a lot of games and does really well. So, like you said, a guy that is all MLS caliber. A guy who had opportunities to stay to play in Europe, but wanted to come back to North America because his family is based here. I asked Adrian Heath about, the fallout in Toronto and if Kamar Lawrence's situation there was a concern to him. And he said that he spoke with Chris Armas, obviously a guy that knows Kamar Lawrence, both from Toronto and New York, and said, there weren't any issues that we saw with Kamar. Obviously those maybe were different for the Bradleys. But they're really ecstatic to get him. Obviously, he's high caliber. I think Toronto is going to pay a portion of his salary and the remaining of his transfer fee to Anderlecht. So to bring in a guy of that level, the Loons are excited to happy to have him. And given the Chase situation, it comes at a really good time.
Yeah, it seems like, kind of caught him almost in a bit of a fire sale there, as it looks like Bob Bradley is trying to remake that team the way that he wants it. Right. So a good piece of business from the Loons there. And speaking of former Loons, the Earthquakes have a couple of them now. Yeah. So there's a couple storylines coming into the game around maybe some players looking to show something to Adrian Heath. One of them I spoke to midweek, Jan Gregush. We talked a bit about how Adrian Heath had been getting the better of Matias Almeida far more often than not. since the two have been meeting in MLS. And one of the reasons is because it seems like Heath has a pretty good way of being able to go at the man marking system that Matias Almeida tends to use, not always.
Right.
And one of the ways that he's done that is by driving center backs through the middle of the pitch and forcing, the Earthquakes players to come off of their marks in order to be able to deal with that. And then now it creates this potential domino effect. When I mentioned that to Jan, he couldn't help but laugh. And he's like, I had a conversation with Matias about that. So, I don't know if that means like maybe they won't man mark in this game, or maybe they're going to have something up their sleeve. But, what do Loons fans make of, Jan Gregush, who was a designated player for this team? And maybe that was an unfair expectation on him and his abilities, but certainly, someone who is a good veteran, quality MLS type player. How is the team kind of coping with his absence in this season?
Jan left Minnesota in good stead. He was always a really good professional, a guy who was a starter for a number of years. Last year, they brought in Will Trapp and had Ozzie Alonso and Hassani Dotson. And Hassani is looked at as kind of the future number 8, and they kind of plugged him in over Jan at times. And Jan kind of just fell out of favor. I don't think he was in the doghouse, or if there was any issues. He was always a consummate professional from what I saw, and how he trained and prepared and was ready. But the team just kind of moved on, and Jan kind of saw himself as kind of an extra piece. And I know that they really liked him, but they declined his contract option because I know he was set to get a pretty big raise here this year. So they just moved on from Jan. There wasn't any sort of bad blood like maybe there is with some other former Loons that are now Earthquakes. I think there's a lot of people in Minnesota that wish Jan well. He was always the type of guy that covered a lot of ground, always wore his heart on his sleeve, and gave everything for the club.
Talk to me a bit about Francisco Calvo. I find him to be fascinating in many different ways. He recently willed the Earthquakes with a couple of headed goals. A 10-man side to come back against the Columbus Crew for a 3-3 draw at PayPal Park, a couple weeks ago.
Right.
And, I have to say, like, one of the things that Quakes fans look for in players is that they will give 100% on the pitch.
Yeah.
And regardless of whether you think Calvo makes the right decisions in all the all the right decisions, in different situations or not, he seems like he's all in to whatever he's doing. He was a captain for the Loons,
right?
And those weren't very good Loon teams, to be fair. And before he left for Chicago.
Yeah.
But what's kind of the impression that he left with you in terms of here's this captain, but a lot of times fans didn't really care for him, maybe thought he was at fault for a lot of goals or whatever the case was.
Right.
Like, what is kind of the hindsight impression of Francisco Calvo?
Yeah, Francisco Calvo is to this day worn the captain's armband more times than any other Minnesota United player. He's got 56 times that he's worn it, and Ozzie Alonso wore it 50 times. So, yeah, like you said, those weren't very good Minnesota teams. I think the impression was, Francisco Calvo is very, very talented, very athletic, maybe not as disciplined as he needs to be, maybe not as much of a, hey, raise my hand, it was my fault, I'll take the leadership, I'll fall on the sword for the responsibility or for the impact that the goals had on the game. I think a lot of times some of his defensive lapses were times that he would point the finger at somebody else, where he would maybe checked out a little bit or didn't, fully read the play before it was, right in his face. And that came back to bite him. I vividly remember times where him and Bobby Shuttleworth, who also paired in Chicago together, would often raise their hands up to the other and point at each other and say, what the hell happened there? That was just something that was constant. Right. And, with San Jose coming to Minnesota now, I think about how Francisco Calvo's time ended at Minnesota. He took a couple of poor yellow cards and was sent off in a game at Toronto. And there was outrage inside Minnesota United over their captain being foolish enough to take a second yellow card after Jan Gregers took a straight red card in that same game. Maybe not anything besides just, maybe a little bit overzealous on Jan's part. But there was outrage over Francisco Calvo and how he conducted himself in that game. And it turned out to be the last time he ever wore a Minnesota United shirt because they traded him to Chicago within a couple of weeks. So I think there's a lot of schadenfreude when Francisco Calvo makes a mistake, just given the fact that he maybe wasn't the consummate professional. I remember a quote that he said about Adrian Heath when he went to Chicago, that he felt that Adrian Heath threw him in the trash like a rookie after that game at Toronto. So they're not close. I don't think they're going to be hugging it out on the touchline on Saturday.
Yeah, and it sounds like maybe the Loons fans are probably going to be all over Calvo throughout this game, so that'll be another thing to watch as well.
Yeah.
Now I had mentioned the Earthquakes made that comeback in that game. One of the things that they've struggled with is putting the ball in the net in open play.
Yeah.
So far, and one of the reasons it feels that way is because the attack in the front feels sometimes very disconnected to what's going on through the middle of the pitch right now, and there's a lack of a cohesion, I think, between those particular areas in the attack. That said, the Earthquakes have some real fast weapons up top. Missing from the last game against Philadelphia was Jamiro Montero, who received the straight red card that forced the Earthquakes to play with 10 men in the game against the Crew. He didn't get to play against his former team last week because of that red. And then also they didn't have Cade Cowell, last second kind of illness situation.
Yeah.
So no Cade, no Jamiro Montero. They expect to have, I believe, both back for this game. That gives them, I think, a more potent attack and probably better connectivity that they didn't have against Philadelphia, as well as, you have players like Christian Espinoza, who the Loons are well familiar with. A lot of pace up top. Obviously, we know Cade's fast. Benji Kakanovich started last week in Cade's absence. Extremely fast player. He's as fast as Cade is. Jeremy Bobasi up top. Right. So that's a lot of speed. And then you throw on Shofis and Montero, and now you've got creativity in the middle as well. It feels like there's going to be a lot for that back line, to deal with. First, do you expect that Kamar Lawrence steps in this game to start in his very first, just now fresh coming over because of the situation at the outside back? And how do you think the rest of the back line, is going to be able to handle that type of speed and creativity?
Yeah, I think that's going to be really key for Minnesota. Kamar Lawrence, I think, is coming in today. I do not expect him to play at all tomorrow. It sounds like, he's been away from Toronto for a number of weeks. He's been training in Jamaica, but hasn't played a game since World Cup qualifiers, I think, in January. So he's not at the right levels. Adrian Heath doesn't think to be able to come in and play. So I expect him to just watch, maybe not even make the 18 or the 20 here this week. They had Hassani Dotson, a midfielder, play left back. They've had DJ Taylor play right back. They've had a number of different players play the left-sided center back spot. Michael Boxall has really been the only mainstay in those back five, if you want to include the goalkeeper, over these first three games. They've had a lot of changes in central midfield too. It's been, maybe the back, 6 or 7, including the goalkeeper, has been a revolving door, just given injuries and illnesses and absences. And it's been a problem that hasn't been exposed, really. Obviously, New York Red Bulls had an expected goals of over 3, and we talked about Dane St. Clair kept those out of the net. But I think that is concerning for Minnesota, just given how they're down to second and third string guys. They are playing with guys that don't have a lot of experience together. So if they're tested with the stretches that and the speed that can create the stretching of the back line, that could be problematic for Minnesota.
I know you have to run, but before you go, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a question about Reynoso. A lot of people are saying he's now potentially becoming the best attacking mid in MLS. What can you say about what you've seen from Reynoso in terms of his growth and his ability to kind of step in and become kind of the guy for Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, he's by far their best player. He's really the fulcrum that leads things in attack, and he has not been playing his best this season. He doesn't have an assist. He doesn't have a goal. He should have had a goal at Red Bulls to really put that game away, but missed some really good opportunities. Obviously, everybody can see the skill and talent that he has. I think he leads the league in successful dribbles. You can see that time and again. He's great with the ball at his feet to be able to pick a pass. He's not going to burn you. He's more of a playmaker than a guy that is going to dazzle you with his own feet, getting in behind defenders. But yeah, I think they're looking for him to kind of return to the form that he's shown in previous years. He has not done it to the same level that we've seen sparks of it, but there hasn't been a fire with him yet this year. I think Minnesota has 3 goals in 3 games. That's not where they want to be. So if they're able to get Reynoso going and get multiple goals, I think that's what they're looking for out of him this year.
So, Andy, I thank you so much for your time today. I know you got to run. Fans, you can follow Andy at Andy Greder on Twitter. Again, he writes for the Pioneer Press in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region. Andy, anything else that fans can know about your work?
Yeah, it's at twincities.com. I've got a number of preview stories that are coming out for this game here later on this afternoon.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for the time, and look forward to the game on Saturday, and best wishes.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, take care.